As I had mentioned, I sort of stopped writing at about 170,000 words of the first book and decided it was no longer a short story, nor was it just one book, but actually well into the second book. So the second book was written contemporaneously with the first book. The protagonist in the second book is still Malila, but she's much less of the prime character than several other people. So I really wanted in this one is to bring a whole bunch of new characters together and have them kind of weave a story and wind up at the same spot. And I did that as an exercise, just seeing how good I could do that. Malila is still the main character because I had to get Malila out of her country. You know, she declares herself, she becomes persona non grata in her own country. She is viewed now as a traitor. She escapes a trap that's virtual, because it's the Unity, it's always virtual. And she now has to actually get herself outside the confines of her country, which is no mean task. So she meets up with the underground workers who are socialists to a man. They're also poets, and they also look like mice. I have this mouse poets is how I've got them in my notes. But they've got an interesting backstory, and they have a consistent society. And I make some comments about socialism. But Malila is initially helped by them and then hurt by them, and so she sets out on her own. She sets out on her own with a buddy who you meet in the first book, Hecate Jones, and Hecate befriends and becomes the companion of an American spy who has been very severely injured. The Unity is this young country. So Hecate and William Yeats Butler, for all you poetry fans, Will Butler is an interesting character, and is kind of a Boy Scout, if you will. But he's trying to get by and do his job, and he's assigned to kill Malila and chooses not to. And that's part of very much his character. But Malila initially says, yeah, he's wounded, he's going to slow us down, I don't want to have anything to do with him. And it's their getting together and becoming friends that is part of her ethical walk through her trials, very many trials, getting out of the Unity, which she succeeds in doing, at least briefly. And it winds up her being captured by somebody else at the end of the book. So, but also Jesse, you hardly hear anything of Jesse Johnstone in the first book. You only hear about him at a critical point when he chooses not to kill her and explains why he can't do that, and how he gets away with not killing her when she's shooting at him. Jesse is an interesting bloke, and you only understand Jesse in retrospect. In the middle book, you now understand more and more of Jesse because you hear more and more of his backstory, and you meet his, his backstory and the people he values. And so at the end of it, Jesse and Malila are mere miles away from each other, but haven't met yet. And so they've got escaped. Jesse has people trying to kill him also, not just Malila. And he's able to escape, but now he's trying to find Malila because he's the only one that can do it. So middle books in a trilogy always are given short shrift. They're always sort of, they've got to bridge the narrative, they've got to carry on the narrative, but you can't let things really resolve too much because that's left to the last book. You got to resolve that stuff in the last book. But I put a lot of effort into Exiles Escape because I still had this whole backstory of Jesse to tell. And you learn lots about the America while at the same time you're learning a lot about the Unity. So this is really a portrait of two nations rather than just a narrative story. The second book, I literally had to chop it, and I chopped it when Malila became an exile. When Malila decided to leave the Unity. That was the end of the first book and the beginning of the second. And she fakes her own suicide and gets a little bit, but then she's chased by her boss. So the second book was about half written, maybe a third written, by the time I finished up the first book and started on the second book. And so there are bits and pieces of it that I've written, and I've written this thing in the Exiles, I've written literally all over the world. The Mouse Poets was written in the Kikuyu Highlands of Kenya. Some of the other characters in here, particularly FEC, was written on a riverboat on the Danube. I've written in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So and these are all very nice vacations. So it's been a lot of fun writing this out and because a lot of this was trying to make all the bits work. Because I like I say, I was trying to make this a weaving of various narratives inside the one book. That was the task I set for myself as a writer to do with this book, and to maintain interest because there was so many people that were interesting. And to do that in various places. So it's very odd when I think about, when were you writing it? I'm thinking about, which vacation was I on? Come and think of it, FEC was in Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, wow. Yeah. All over the world. Was there a part that you wrote when you were somewhere in Asia?
I was on Java when I was writing part of, let's see, which part? A lot of the narrative in the second book becomes characters inside this core computer. This core computer is a massive computer, but it essentially is no different than what we've got. You go someplace and you have a password and you're allowed through a gate and you can collect information and bring it back and look at things and bring it back, but it's still two-dimensional. Whereas the core is three-dimensional. You can look down, if you get into the open core, you can look down at the usual users and you can look over their shoulders and you see what they're doing, and you can sneak in any place you want. And that's dangerous. You don't know what's on the other side. So the second book introduces you to a whole new cast of characters who are virtual, but they're very real people. You meet Cain, who is known as Presence, who is the bad guy's assassin, but he's quite a nice guy other than that. You meet Frog, who is Will Butler's interface. He happens to be green, and it's tough being green. You meet several other individuals inside this open core, and it's hardly populated because nobody intended it to be used. It was merely meant as extra space. And so you've got lots of, the landscape is sort of made up of like old sports archives and newspaper clippings and vital statistics. And somebody is, they go into an area that is forbidden books. So somebody's leaning on Huck Finn because that's forbidden. And so I can have a commentary about the sort of the cancel culture of today by showing what sort of things have been literally made illegal in this new and wonderful new world of the Unity. Mostly it's to entertain them. C.S. Lewis, who is my favorite author and has been since I was read to of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, back before it actually got published in the United States, which is another story entirely, and I won't get into it. But I have read his Problem of Pain as an exercise, as a physician exercise, every 5 to 7 years throughout my career. And I read, I think, almost everything he's written. He once said, the world needs no more Christian writers. None, doesn't need them. What it needs is writers who are Christian. And so I bring, as a believer, I bring a different viewpoint to what's happening. And some of my characters are, and some of my characters are not believers. And so Malila comes from being, she becomes more attuned to the reasonableness of faith in a deity during the second book. That's not the major point. That's just a minor side note. Jesse, walks, he's 76 years old. He makes a comment one time, as a young man, you think that, when you get older, you're going to do better. As an old man, you realize you're never going to be as good as you want to be. Which I found to be true. The book finds us all where we are. It's every trail, and I'm a backpacker from way back, every trail finds you where you are. And you have an idea where you want to go, but you may not get there. You may be, the bridge may be out. Your energies may not allow you. You may run out of what you want, and you may meet enemies that are bigger than you are. Have I told you about the time I met a bear? But that's a different thing. So that in people's travels, they meet things that are bigger than they are. And that's how people get around that, and the necessity for loss in order to persevere. You get by, but you have to pay the toll under the bridge to get by.